All right, good morning everyone. Today we're going to go over sanding before we do any sort of finishing with our finishing oil, the Tung oil. The main things that you're going to need are just your 3 different pieces of sandpaper. There are different kinds. I circled here so you know where to look. You're going to need some 80 grit, 120, and 220 grit. And you can even see on the paper itself, it says, the 80 is for the coarse removal. 120 is kind of your medium, middle of the road, and then 220 is the fine finishing. And that's going to get, basically, using all 3 of these is going to get this rough, kind of jagged surface down to a much smoother final product. Okay, so I'm going to start with the 80. You always start with the smallest number. It's the roughest. And you'll notice I already tore it down to a much smaller size than what I gave you. It's because, we're working with a really small surface, and getting inside of the scoop in particular is really hard to do with a big piece of sandpaper. So I'm just going to start with the handle. We talked about the grain of the wood, right? So we want to always sand with the grain of the wood. So the direction that I'm going to be applying the sandpaper is in the same direction that I see the grain. When you're working with the handle, make sure to support it so you don't accidentally snap the handle off. And it's as easy as this. Alright, so now you can see I haven't worked on the scoop at all yet. It's still very rough. But the handle is pretty much finished with the 80 grit. I haven't done 120 or 220 yet. And I just want you to notice that it's going to look a little fuzzy. The fibers of the wood have been kind of roughed up by the 80. But you shouldn't see as many like big ridges or gouges or anything. It should be relatively smooth. So now I'm going to move on to the scoop, which is definitely a little more challenging. One thing I do like to do at the very beginning, like I don't know if you can see, but some of the rim of my scoop is a little jaggedy. I don't know if you can see this. Like right in here, some of it is not as smooth as I want it to be. So sometimes I'll just flip, and can you see all the sandpaper, all this sawdust? Sometimes I will take the scoop and actually flip it over. And then that's going to help level it out. All right, cool. I'm okay with that. All right, the outside's definitely a lot easier than the inside. When we drew these arrows to denote like the direction of the grain, those arrows are gone now because we carved them away. But that's basically the direction you want to move in. Try and think back to those. And this takes a while. And I know sometimes, again, depending on, the angle or what I'm doing, I like to put the sandpaper down and kind of move. Sometimes that can be a little easier. It's up to you. And it takes a while. Okay, but I'll come back to that. And then the inside, okay? Hopefully you double checked yourself before you started sanding and kind of went around and did like a pinch test, going around and just seeing the thickness of the walls of the scoop to make sure that they're roughly the same, pretty uniform. So I'm going to take the 80 grit sandpaper, and this is where you really, sometimes I even rip the paper smaller because you would need to get inside the scoop. So, and again, I like to hold it in my hand to support those walls. I would hate to accidentally, if you did carve a little thin, which is fine, you would not want to break one of these walls while you're sanding. So it's good just to support that. And you might see, like, I'm seeing some purple in there from the sandpaper. Don't worry about that. Don't stress. That'll come out. All right. All right, so I have gotten most of the bumps and ridges out of the scoop. You can still see I kind of goofed in here. Some of the gouges I made went a little too deep, and so it's really hard to get that all the way sanded down without going through the wall of the scoop. So because, you can see how much sawdust is here. 80 really takes a lot off. This really you know, thick, coarse grit. Takes off quite a bit of wood, and I'm sure you've noticed that as you've been working. So now I've decided to just, instead of risking like going through or sanding too much, I'm just going to put the 80 aside. I'm going to move on to 120. And it's the exact same process. Okay, so I'm going to tear some off just so it's more manageable. I'm going to start with the handle, supporting it with my hand so it doesn't snap, going with the grain, and continuing to smooth. One thing I didn't mention before, with the end of the handle, I want mine to be pretty smooth and rounded. So again, you might want to, you know, work with the actual spoon, like move the spoon instead of moving the sandpaper, just to get that rounded bit down there. Okay, but primarily you are going to just hold the wood and sand. Okay. And then it's really nice because some of that fuzziness is going to start going away. And then same with up here, same exact thing. You're just going to go over everything you did. One thing I did want to point out on the back of my spoon, remember that circle that we drew? And to make sure we didn't accidentally carve through the bottom of the scoop. Some people like to round that off so it's like a traditional spoon shape. I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit. I left a little bit of it, and I like it because it's almost like a place for it to rest. It's like a flat surface for the spoon to sit steadily and not like rock back and forth. Totally up to you. Sometimes it's like out of your control. You're like, oh, I already sanded over that, so that's going to be round. And remember, guys, this is your first spoon ever. So if you make some mistakes, it is not a big deal. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and continue doing 120 all over. And then after that, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but with the 220. And you'll notice it gets a lot finer. And I'll check back in then. All right, I feel like I am finally finished sanding. You'll notice I got out my dust pan. I did not send one of those home with you guys. Hopefully you have one, in your kitchen or wherever you keep your cleaning supplies. Check with your parental units, see if they can help you out with that. But you do want to get all the sawdust out of here before you do any sort of finishing with oil. Okay, get all of that out. Sometimes it's even helpful to take just like a wet rag, like a slightly damp rag, and also kind of just do a swipe. Because that sawdust gets everywhere. Okay. And then actually, so I want to talk about real quick how we're going to be applying the finishing oil. So I have 2 pieces of the same, just like, it's kind of like t-shirt material. It's like cotton. That's your best bet. Any sort of fabric is going to be fine. I cut some scraps from fabric that I found in the sculpture studio at Garrison. But you want to, I sent home 2. And again, you can cut that down into more manageable sizes. But one, and you probably can't tell, but I dampened it. I went to the sink, and it's not soaking wet. I don't want to actually get the wood wet, really. The dampness of the cloth will help pick up any of those little tiny particles of sawdust that are still on the spoon. So once I've done like a pretty good shakedown, I've gotten all the sawdust out of there, especially inside the scoop and in all these little creases and stuff. All right, I feel like my space is clean. We're good to go. All right, damp cloth is going away. Now I have a nice, clean, dry cloth to work with. Like rag really is fine. And then you want to get out your Tung oil. I'm going to go ahead and open it. I sent it home to you guys in these cute little containers. And basically you just want to do 1 coat. It's pretty simple. This stuff is not toxic. This is actually like a food safe finishing product. It's very natural and organic. So if you get some on your skin, like, don't freak out. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so I'm just going to dip the rag in. Oops, got some on my table. Good thing it's a wood table. And you can see, I don't know if you saw that already. Like, do you see the difference from here to here? I'll scoop that up. And you're basically just trying to like rub it into the grain of the wood. You're not trying to like wipe it off per se. You actually want it to kind of, you're going to be a little pretty generous. Also guys, you probably, I have this workbench to work at, but if you're working at like your parents' kitchen table, throw down some bags or some sort of protector so you're not getting stuff all over a nice table. There we go. But I'm pretty liberally applying this coat. I want it to soak in. And all those little nooks and crannies. And I want it to soak in for a long time. There is one little hack, if you're like running behind and you're like, I need to get to my next coat of Tung oil in a much quicker amount of time, and you look outside the window and it's sunny out, you are in luck. You can go and set this outside in direct sunlight, and it speeds up the process of the wood saturating the oil. So you can really see the difference now, right? Look how cool that looks. So if it's sunny outside, you can slap it out in the sunlight, and then it only takes about an hour. But otherwise, I usually give it like a full day of soaking in. Some people do a couple hours, like probably 4 hours of soaking it in is fine. But I'm just a little particular about my woodworking. Oh, look how nice this looks. And you can see it's not really darkening. It's not a stain at all. That's not what the purpose of Tung oil is. It is just kind of enhancing the natural color of the wood. Oh, it looks gorgeous. Oh. All right. And then you definitely like grab some scrap paper or something, because this should be it shouldn't be dry, you know? It should have kind of like a thin coating of this on it. Oh, beautiful. So grab some like scrap paper and set it down, you know. And let that absorb, let that soak in. Like I said, I'm gonna check back in a day, do a 220. I'm basically, actually, when I come back in a day, I'm gonna take another dry rag and wipe up any extra oil that I see on it so that it's perfectly dry. I mean, I can't do that now, but tomorrow when I check in on it, that's what I'll do. And then you take your piece of 220 grit sandpaper and do another round of sanding, but just with the 220, and then you do one last coat of the Tung oil, and then you're good. And it is food safe. This kind of shape that I cut for you guys, and the kind of scoop that we made here would be ideal for, I don't know, if your mom drinks coffee. It's like a nice coffee scoop, right, for the beans. It's kind of like, more of a scoop than a spoon because it's so deep. But it's beautiful, and I hope you guys are really proud of yourself. And any sort of imperfections, like Lord knows I have plenty of imperfections in here. I think it just reminds whoever's using it that this was like made by hand. This wasn't made at some factory or mass produced or anything. So don't be stressed about any sort of errors or mistakes you think you made, okay? You should be very proud of yourselves. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to say, we talked about this a long time ago, but I want to refresh your memory. Any sort of rag that does have Tung oil in it, you don't, even though it is very natural and food safe and everything, blah, 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 you don't want to ball it up and throw it in the trash. You want to lay it out to dry. In fact, you probably could just like lay it here, you know. Sometimes I always tell people to, if you're like working in a wood shop, to drape it over the side of your trash can and let it dry out before you actually put it in a trash can. It can get flammable, especially on like a really hot day. So just be careful with that. But once it's dry, like once you can no longer feel the oil in the cloth, you're good to go. You can ball it up and throw it in the trash. Okay? So I hope you're proud of yourself and all your hard work, and that is basically it for now.